All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos. And today we have a very special sponsored stream. A major shout out goes to Claudiu, one of our Romanian brothers who had requested a stream. And I, as you guys know, had been working on my dissertation. So this is about a month behind schedule. But now we're going to be diving back into a handful of sponsored streams we got lined up. And he requested that we talk a little bit about the unique Romanian experience under communism and the intense persecution of the Orthodox Church and clergy and Orthodox believers under the communist regime. And so we're going to be attempting to dive into this topic. And I have to confess, this was one, a lot of these sponsored streams, although they're obscure, I already have a grasp on the general framework. This one was one that I had to dive into as very much a novice. And so we're going to be looking into how Romania became communist. Again, really at the end of World War II, when the Red Army began to advance westward and took over what would we consider the Eastern Bloc countries. And we're going to be looking at the intense persecution of Orthodox Christians under the communist regime. As you guys have heard before, Father Turbo Qual says you can't be Orthodox and be a Zionist. And I'm here to tell you that it is absolutely also true. You cannot be an Orthodox Christian and be a communist. At the end of, I put together a big document today. Again, this was a topic I wasn't super familiar with. So I have a document that will be available on the website after this stream. And it is 23 pages long. It's the longest show note document I've put together. And we're not going to read all of it because I know that can be a bit boring for people. But we're going to go over some of the highlights because Romania under communism, I put together essentially 7 bullet points that I could find that kind of make it unique. Now, obviously, there's a lot of commonalities regarding communist regimes and their overthrow. Let's see. Generally, totalitarian one-party states. Centralized economic structures, secret police, surveillance state. We're going to learn about the Securitate in the Romanian context and how they infiltrated churches, infiltrated social gatherings, infiltrated basically every organization you could find to report back to the communist regime. Ideological indoctrination and propaganda. We're going to see that all religious education is banned. Suppression of religion, outright suppression, desecration of religious churches, and during their agricultural policy. So once the communists kind of took over Romania, you'll see a massive shift. A lot of the resistance against communism was by what we would consider the peasants or people out in the countryside, in the rural areas, more so than the cities. And this is a point that I think is worth kind of mentioning when you look into really everything in the 20th century, because World War I and World War II have totally reshaped how we as Westerners view the world and how we understand it. And you know, some of the controversy as of recent with Daryl Cooper, podcast Martyr Made, talking about, you know, he went on Tucker and talked about Churchill and how World War II and the Holocaust is like this religious narrative that underpins the way that Western civilization operates and works right now. And I was going to make the point that when we look at, be it fascism, nationalism, communism, socialism, a lot of these ideologies form within the cities. And Romania, because of the resistance that they were seeing in the rural areas, would essentially destroy entire towns or villages and force people to move towards the cities where they would be essentially inculcated within a culture and milieu in which people accepted communism and that type of stuff more readily. But in the Romanian case, I identified and it's not totally unique. Obviously, you can find these things in other regimes, but one of the things that's peculiar about Romania under the communist regime is the intense psychological persecution. So we're going to be looking at some of the prisons that were operated that were operating under the communist regime. And there was a documentary that Claudio shared with me. It was Beyond Torture. That's why I named the stream that particular title. And we're going to be watching that documentary, but some of it is in Romanian. It does have subtitles, so I know people listening to these shows often listen to them in the podcast form. So whenever the Romanian comes up, I'm just going to take the microphone and read whatever's on the screen, so people listening who don't have the video visual like you guys do can know what's going on. But the Pitești prison is a famous basically experiment in re-education, and the tortures that they particularly instrumented against the Orthodox faithful and Orthodox clergy. We're going to be covering it, and it's horrific. We're talking about, I have a whole section in the show notes where we'll be going over it, but forced apostasy, mocking of Christ, torturing people in sort of mock crucifixions, keeping people awake for hours, all types of psychological torture to basically re-educate and break the psyche of these individuals. And multiple saints actually emerged from this torture. And that's one of the ironies when we look at communism, and I put that in my show notes, is that after communism falls, Orthodoxy comes back with a strength. And we've seen that in Romania, because it isn't until the revolution in 1989, in December of 1989, that Romania actually liberates itself from communism. And we'll be looking at how Ceausescu, who is one of the communist leaders who takes over in the 70s and basically forms a cult of personality, him and his wife, who were atrocious, absolutely atrocious, they were actually murdered in the streets during the revolution. And it's one of the only instances in these the liberation from communism in which the leaders were actually publicly executed. But here's my 7 points, and then we'll get into more details of the topic. But here's my 7 points that sort of make communism in Romania unique. Number one is its violence, and it is a distinctive revolution. One of the things about communism in Romania is that it incorporated nationalism. And so typically, when the Soviet Union spread to a new country, it sort of dissolved national sentiments in favor of a larger sort of allegiance to Moscow and communism, Lenin Marxist communism, generally speaking. But Romania is actually a unique case where they tried to blend nationalism into Lenin Marxist framework. But unlike largely peaceful transitions of Eastern European countries, and I would point out countries like Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania experienced a violent revolution in 1989 to liberate itself from communism. And I have a video. It's not specifically oriented towards Orthodoxy, but I would like to provide a larger historical perspective today. So I got multiple videos. I don't know if we're going to watch all of them, but the goal is to kind of introduce the whole historical context of how to understand this stuff regarding the Romanian perspective. And so over 1,000 casualties in 1989 when the Romanian Revolution occurred to liberate itself. But communism, and my point too, communism in Romania had an incredible cult of personality. So Nicolae Ceausescu established one of the most extreme personality cults in communist history. And I saw some commentators, sort of historians, scholars, say that it rivaled that of Joseph Stalin and even Kim Jong-un today. So interesting point there. Enormous public ceremonies, forced adulation of Ceausescu, mass propaganda, and of course, in the name of the House of the People, right? Ceausescu builds this enormous, elaborate, extravagant place for him to live. But this isn't about greed or anything. This is about the rights of the people, right? This is the House of the People, and yet you can see the irony. I don't need to dive into that. Number 3 is the extreme austerity and economic policies. So unparalleled austerity measures imposed to repay foreign debt. And this was another one of the interesting things about Romania after World War II is it rapidly industrialized. And on paper, the economy, from what I was reading, the economy of Romania, basically from World War II to the fall of communism in 1989 in Romania, on paper, they had a pretty strong economy. However, and it even was larger than that of Western nations like Spain and Portugal, which isn't the greatest achievement in the world. But in reality, the average Romanian was living an incredibly poor life. In fact, I saw one commentator say that in Romania, the only other country in Europe that had a lower standard of living was Albania. And so, despite the economics on paper, the average Romanian living under the communist regime were in extreme poverty, few opportunities economically, and impoverishment in regards to nutrition and food access. The rationing of resources was very, very common. And so it resulted in a catastrophic poverty, severe shortages of basic goods, rationing of food, electricity, heat, and gasoline. I saw one comment say that 1 out of every 5 light posts, street lights in Romania during the communist regime would be lit because all the electricity was being devoted towards the industrial development of the nation, which was kind of the general sentiment of the Soviet Union, right? Is that people, the workers, all need to industrialize to create this sort of mechanical monster known as the Soviet Union. Number 4 was the systematization and forced urbanization and cultural destruction. As I mentioned, when Ceausescu implemented forced relocation of rural populations, and this was due to them being resisting of communism and often still very faithful to the Orthodox Church, and priests would tell people to vote in some of these elections against the communist regime, which of course the communism eventually then imprisons the leaders and bans the parties, and so it's a one-party state. But Ceausescu implemented forced relocation of these rural populations to standardize urban apartments and to sort of conform any resistance into places where he had power and control. And this large-scale destruction of historic Romanian villages, monasteries, churches, and traditional cultural heritage to achieve a modern socialist uniformity. And this is what I was making the point is when we look at all these former Soviet Union countries, Orthodoxy has come back in full force. And Romania is a perfect example because Romania is now listed as the most Christian country in the world. It is the most, it has the most monasteries and monks per capita of any country in the world. And so, and realize all of this freedom has only occurred since 1989. So we're looking at, 35 years ago, basically. So that's pretty much that's a very short window when we look at history itself. Number 5 was the independent foreign policy within the Warsaw Pact. As I mentioned, communism within Romania actually adopted a sort of nationalistic framework. And so it uniquely pursued an independent foreign policy from Moscow. And we're going to highlight at one point, there is a bit of a divergence between the communism in Romania and that of Moscow itself. And so during Ceausescu's rule, notably criticizing the 1968 Soviet Union invasion of Czechoslovakia, Ceausescu cultivated relationships with both Western capitalist nations. This is part of what made Romania look prosperous on paper, even though the people lived in terrible conditions, and communist China, creating a unique geopolitical balancing. And then the horrific Pitești experiment, which we're going to be diving into, is one of the most gruesome episodes in psychological and physical torture in communist history. And it happened in Romania, and it was geared specifically at the Orthodox Church, clergy, and the faithful. And so it aimed at explicitly annihilating the Orthodox Christian faith, morality, and Romanian identity among its prisoners. And then number 7, my 7th point that makes communism in Romania unique, is the severe religious persecution intertwined with nationalism. So communist persecution explicitly targeted the Romanian Orthodox Church due to its central role in national identity. But because of that, it had to reincorporate this sort of national identity. And it forced the communist regime forced apostasy, desecration of rituals, imprisonment of clergy, and uniquely aimed to dismantle the national religious identity and foundation. Now, some of you guys may already be familiar with the legionaries. And so I wanted to introduce that to you. Oh, where did that show note go? Oh, so some of you guys may have read this book right here. It's actually a great read. It's a great read. So Cornelio Zella Codranu, and he was a Romanian nationalist, political activist, charismatic leader, founder of the Legionaries, or the Legion of the Archangel Michael, and was deeply religious. This was an Orthodox Christian-inspired political movement actively operating during the interwar period, so before the communist takeover. And one of the things for Codranu is that he's very much skeptical of maybe Jewish involvement in European nations, very much an anti-communist. And so his book, For My Legionaries, is considered his sort of ideological manifesto outlining the formation principles and early struggles of his movement. But the reason I bring it up is not that it relates so much to the communist takeover in Romania or the persecution, but how Orthodox Christianity and nationalism were so intertwined in Romania, and Codranu incorporating this and trying to use this as a sort of reemergence of Romanian identity after World War I. And so post-World War I, Romania faced severe economic, political, and social instability, political corruption, social tensions, all that different stuff. And so Codranu's movement emerged as a response to the perceived decadence, corruption, secular liberalism, and rising Bolshevism, emphasizing a militant form of Orthodox nationalism. And when you listen, I've heard clergy speak about this book, and there has been some mixed reviews. I've also heard clergy really like this book. So if you haven't read it, go check it out. It's actually a great read. And so some of the central themes is like Orthodox nationalism, anti-communism, and suspicions of Zionism and Jewish involvement, asceticism and spiritual purity, martyrdom and heroism. And he kind of utilizes martyrs, Romanian martyrs and saints, as an inspiration for the people to kind of fight against what he saw was the impending threat, which eventually they lost. The communists won. So we're going to touch on all that. Here's a quick little intro, just so we can get an idea of what it is that we're going to be tackling today. And so Romanian church persecution, a historical analysis. This is a very, very small thing. I'm going to read it all. My show notes basically cover all this plus some, but I'm not going to read all that to you guys. So throughout the 20th century, the communist regime in Romania subjected religious institutions and believers to severe persecution. The Romanian Orthodox Church, as well as other religious denominations, faced oppression, censorship, violence, as the totalitarian government sought to eliminate religious influence and establish state atheism. The early communist era, so we're talking 1945 to 1965. Following World War II, the Romanian Communist Party gained control of the country and began implementing policies to suppress religious freedom. In 1948, the government passed Decree 177, which effectively nationalized all church property and placed religious institutions under strict state control. The regime also arrested and imprisoned numerous priests, monks, and nuns who refused to comply with the new regulations. One notable example of persecution during this period was the case of the Burning Bush movement, a group of Orthodox monks and nuns who opposed the communist government's interference in church affairs. Many members of the movement were arrested, tortured, and sentenced to long prison terms. And then this is Ceausescu's era under the rule of Nicolae Ceausescu. And anybody out there who speaks Romanian, forgive me. I've been trying to learn how to pronounce some of this stuff. So in the Romanian, the S's and the C's throw me off because sometimes they're k, sometimes they're sh. But I'm going to do my best. So please give me a little bit of lenience on the pronunciation of any the Romanian terms, names, cities. But Nicolae Ceausescu's the persecution of religious groups intensified. The regime sought to create a new socialist man and viewed religion as an obstacle to this goal. So typical of the sort of Lenin Marxist, Marx is famous for claiming religion is the opium of the people. And basically it's an antiquated belief system that's filled with sort of what the communists would call copium. We would certainly label that, use that term right back at them regarding communism. But they felt that these religions and religious foundations had to be destroyed so that they could create the new man of the 20th century. And the government implemented a series of measures to further restrict religious activities, including the demolition of churches, as we talked about, the banning of religious education. No child could be educated or could have religious education. It had to be the state official atheist education. And the infiltration of religious institutions by the secret police, the Securitate. One of the most famous acts of persecution during this period was the systemization program, which aimed to modernize rural areas by destroying traditional villages and relocating residents to urban apartment blocks. Many historic churches and monasteries were demolished as part of this process. Father George Kalichu, an Orthodox priest and dissident, described the persecution he faced. I was arrested, beaten, and tortured. They wanted me to betray my faith and collaborate with the regime, but I refused. I spent years in prison, but my belief in God never wavered. Post-communist era, so 1989, this is the Romanian Revolution, liberating itself from communism to the present. Following the Romanian Revolution of 1989 and the fall of the communist regime, religious freedom was restored and the persecution of churches ceased. However, the scars of the communist era remain, with many religious communities struggling to rebuild and reclaim their confiscated properties. In recent years, efforts have been made to acknowledge the suffering endured by religious groups during the communist period. In 2017, the Romanian government established the National Day of Remembrance for the victims of the communist persecution, which is observed on May 14th. Now, here's one of the things that I find very interesting. Some of you guys already may be familiar with what's going on in Romania right now. So Georgescu was a man running for, is it prime minister or president of Romania? I don't know if it's prime minister or president. Anyways, the head of the government. And he actually won the vote. And it's so funny, guys, if you go through, so this is a BBC article, and every single article I could find from mainstream articles, all were denying that the EU was involved in the annulment of this election, which we know is a fact. The claim was that Georgescu was sponsored, or that the Russians were behind the promotion of his candidacy, and therefore he is no longer eligible. And so not only did they stop him from winning the election, then they arrested him. And then this is in March of this year. Then they voted that he is not allowed to run in the election in next month in May. And all under the pretense that he has some type of connections to Russia, which is not accurate whatsoever. He is an Orthodox Christian. He recently had an interview with Tucker Carlson. He is a nationalist. He is right wing, but of course, every article label him far right, or they'll use ultra right wing or radical right wing. He's not. He's basically just an Orthodox Christian that takes Orthodox Christian values, combines it with Romanian nationalism, and wants to free Romania from the EU. And of course, the EU comes and stops it. And so the irony, the reason why I bring this up with today's conversation is that the irony of the communist takeover of Romania and how the EU operates within the EU nation states is so similar. Banning political opponents, arresting them, combating misinformation. It's the same thing over and over again. And when we go through the document here in a few, you're going to see that what's happening today with the globalism, as we already know, generally talking about the structure, the framework of globalism is a form of global communism. And so, and Jay and multiple people have already done work demonstrating that, whether it be the Bolsheviks or the Maoist regime, that most of communist experiments or regimes were sponsored by central banking in the West. And so they have been funding communist takeovers to basically create the Cold War dialectic, funding both sides and seeing which one would win and how beneficial or how well could a communist regime be run. Of course, they've all sort of failed. Kim Jong-un in North Korea is still holding strong. But when we look at like what's going on in Romania today, these are people that want to have a voice, want to be able to determine its own destiny. And the globalist EU, NATO, U.S. military industrial complex is making sure that that does not happen. And so as we're talking about the liberation of Romania from communism, it feels like in a strange way that the EU, NATO, the military, it's really a sort of repackaged 2.0 sort of Soviet era takeover of these nations. So I just wanted to throw that out there. But I'm going to play a video here to get started, but I saw some people send in some super chats. H. Brazzi throws in $5. Thank you so much, brother. He says, for anybody wondering, the music is the B-Dive Glory to God mix. It goes hard. Absolutely. Thank you so much, H. Brazzi, for the support, brother. Really appreciate that. And yeah, if anybody was wondering about the intro music, that is B-Dive, and I have all those songs with videos that I put together with them with Orthodox visuals and a playlist called Glory to God Mix. So you guys can check that out if you like. Thank you, H. Brazzi. And he throws in another $5. Thank you so much, brother. He says, I bet myself that you would come on camera with the eyebrow raised mew. I swear nobody is on your level with the consistency of mewing. Appreciate that, my man. Ed throws in 10, says, I was baptized in the church on Lazarus Saturday. Well, glory to God, Ed. That's wonderful. Glory to God, brother. Welcome home. Welcome to the arena. And blessed Holy Week to you and blessed Pascha. That's fantastic, brother. He says, thank you for helping me in my journey. Well, I'm humbled if I've helped in any way. You know, that's on you. So you made the right choices. You went to church. You joined. You made the decision. So thank you, brother, for the support and glory to God and God bless you and everything. Logan Daly throws in 10 and says, nub up. That's right. We need a nub wave up in here, guys. Could definitely use some of the support. So thank you so much, Logan. God bless you, brother. Hope you're doing well. And the Dance Commodore throws in 10 COTEL crew memberships. Thank you so much, man. Really appreciate that. And God bless everybody who just got those memberships. That's fantastic. Thank you, man, for the support. And David James Flood throws in a COTEL crew membership. So that's 11 memberships right there. Thank you guys so much. Let me just check the dono chat real quick. Drew throws in $3.99, says, greetings from Bloomington. I was received into the church this Saturday along with 7 others. Thank you for all your work. Well, if he's in Bloomington, Indiana, he must be at All Saints. So, Drew, God bless, brother. I've been to All Saints. You know, my priest, Father Athanasius, actually founded All Saints in Bloomington, Indiana. So, shout out to Father Peter Gilquist and everybody down at All Saints. That's great, Drew. And Victor Ziegler throws in a generous $100. He says, appreciate your work, bro. Keep it going. Well, thank you so much, Victor. Really appreciate that, my man. God bless you. And Mario throws in 5 COTEL crew memberships. There we go. Let's get the nub wave going. Let's get these memberships. And the memberships, guys, I just posted 3 Montana speeches, Montanica speeches. So I'm not going to be at Montanica this year, and I didn't go last year. But my speeches from 2021, where Jay Dyer was there, Brother Augustine, and then FDA, we were the 4 speakers. And then in 2022, it was Brother Augustine, myself, Abbot Trifon, Metropolitan Jonah, and FDA. Maybe there was another person, I forget. But that speech is up. And then the 2023, where I was there with His Grace, Bishop Maxime, it was Father Turbo Qualls, myself, John Hears, and another clergy. I forget, somebody spoke. But anyways, those speeches are now available for YouTube members, so you guys can check that out. And somebody requested my Trad Forum speech from like 2020 It's a 2020 or 2021. It was the event that Michael Sisko put together, and I spoke at it with Luke Kindrat, Brother Augustine, E. Michael Jones, and Roosh was there, but he didn't speak. I was able to meet Roosh. I think those were the 4 speakers. And then Michael Sisko. So it was Michael Sisko, Luke Kindrat, Brother Augustine, myself, and E. Michael Jones. It was 5 speakers. That was at the Trad Forum. So I'm going to post that video for members as well. So anybody who gets a membership today, you guys should get access to all the members' videos here on YouTube. So thank you so much, Mario. And Logan throws in another 10, man. Thank you so much, Logan. God bless you, brother. Really appreciate the support. So thank you guys so much. All right. Now I want to, again, there'd be a lot of reading if we just read everything today, and I have a huge document. So my goal is to try to contextualize everything for you guys. And I got multiple videos. So the first one I thought would be somewhat useful is to learn about how Romania came into existence. So this first video I have is just a quick video going over Romania and how it came into existence. I'm going to speed it up. So 1.25. Just so you guys can know like the history of the country. And then I want to get into, you know, we can watch, I got tons of videos. We could watch this one. This was on Nicolae Ceausescu and his regime. This is a great video by Father Paul. We're going to play all of that. And this was an interesting video. It's not by a scholar or anything. It's by a YouTube channel called Living Ironically in Europe. And it has a good little overview, but much of what's in it is already covered. This was a great video that I found. That's basically this gentleman right here talking about Eastern Orthodoxy and communist Romania and quoting a bunch of Orthodox theologians and philosophers talking about it. Now it's 14 minutes long and it can be a bit dry. He's not a native English speaker, but potentially dive into that one. And it covers the burning bush movement, which that's what this article here is for, but I didn't want to read everything to you guys, but I'm going to share the link so everybody can get access to everything. So here is the link for that article there. It covers the burning bush, which was an organized movement by Orthodox Christians to resist communism, sort of underground. But instead of reading the article to you guys can check it out if you want to learn more, but we're going to watch some videos today to try to cover all of it. Mario just became a new member, COTEL crew member. Thank you so much, Mario. God bless you, bro. And Logan Daly renews his membership. Now everybody spam the Giga Chat emote. Thank you so much, Logan. God bless you, brother. And Bredimus says, listening from work, thank you for these historical dives and discussions. God bless. Well, thank you so much, Bredimus, for the support. Really appreciate it. And Neo Neon throws in 10, says, evening DPH or DHP, listening while I hang my icons on my apartment walls. Collecting them is so addicting. It is true. Once you start buying icons, you want to buy more and more. I have dozens more I want to get and put up. Yeah, I share that sentiment. And Jack throws in 10, says, my mother and I were baptized in the church this Lazarus Saturday. Thank you for your vids, DHP, DPH. They helped us out a lot. God bless you, brother. Well, thank you so much, Jack. Glory to God, man. The fact that you and your mother were brought in together, that's fantastic, man. That's absolutely fantastic. Welcome home. It's so great to hear about so many people being brought in during this Pascha season. So that's great. That's fantastic. So anyways, first thing we're going to check out is this quick little overview on how Romania came into existence. And then we're going to dive deeper into communism and the persecution of the Orthodox faithful.
Taking over 200,000 captives, they were allied with migrating tribes of Slavs and Bulgars, who intermingled with and gradually replaced the Avars in a more established state. For hundreds of years, the First Bulgarian Empire came to dominate the entire region. The Bulgars were a longtime enemy and occasional ally of the Byzantine Eastern Romans. Beginning in the late 9th century, the semi-nomadic Magyars conquered the Carpathian Basin and Transylvanian Plateau. The Bulgarian Empire collapsed soon afterwards due to attacks from both the Kievan Rus and then the Byzantine Roman Empire. During this time, the Latin-speaking Vlachs, as the Greek-speaking Eastern Romans referred to them as, gained greater autonomy within and on the fringes of the Kingdom of Hungary. In the mid-13th century, the Mongol Empire devastated the kingdoms and principalities of Eastern Europe. After the Mongols withdrew, 3 Latin-speaking states formed: Transylvania, Moldavia, and Wallachia. Transylvania was a semi-independent vassal of the Kingdom of Hungary, as was Moldavia, although it maintained a much higher degree of autonomy, given its more remote location. In 1330, Wallachia defeated a much larger Hungarian army, establishing itself as a fully independent state. This independence would last for less than 100 years. Wallachia allied with Hungary against an even greater foe, the Ottoman Turks, and after repeated campaigns, they became an Ottoman vassal in 1417, paying a large yearly tribute in exchange for retaining independent rule. During the turbulent time that followed in Wallachia, they fought against themselves as often as they rebelled against the Turks, which was often, usually triggered by failure to pay the yearly tribute, most notably under Vlad Tepes, also known as Vlad the Impaler or Vlad Dracula. He became renowned throughout Europe, not only for the devastating defeats he dealt the Ottoman Empire, but also for his legendary cruelty, which hundreds of years later would inspire the fictional character Dracula. During the long reign of Vlad's contemporary, Stefan the Great of Moldavia, that state reached the height of its power, influence, and independence. One of the greatest military commanders of his day, he won 48 of 50 battles, and defeated larger armies of Polish, Ottoman, and Hungarians. However, after his death, Moldavia, as well as Wallachia, Transylvania, and Hungary, fell under increased Ottoman influence and control. However, the relationship between the Ottoman Empire and these client states was extremely complex and frequently changed. Often near complete autonomy was granted in exchange for tribute payments of gold and men to fill the ranks of the Ottoman army. During the reign of Michael the Brave, a large unified, fully independent native state was established on both sides of the Carpathian Mountains for the first time since Decebalus had ruled Dacia. This state was short-lived, as Michael the Brave was assassinated, and the Ottomans gained control again a few years later. Hungary regained its lost territory, and Transylvania once again became a Hungarian vassal state. The Russian and Ottoman empires fought many wars, often involving this region. The early 19th century saw a brief period of Russian control of Wallachia and Moldavia, and a series of uprisings and rebellions against the Russian, Austro-Hungarian, and Ottoman rule, as nationalist sentiment continually grew, with the goal of uniting all Romanian-speaking people. Wallachia and Moldavia unified, and obtained their liberty from the Ottoman Empire after the Romanian War of Independence with Russian support, establishing the Kingdom of Romania in 1881. With the outbreak of World War I, Romania declared neutrality, as it was squeezed between 3 great powers. Romania joined the war 2 years later in 1916. By the war's end, Romania had suffered over 500,000 casualties. They had been motivated by the desire to join with the 3 million Romanians of Transylvania. In the treaties following the war and the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, this goal was accomplished, creating Greater Romania during the interwar period. During World War II, Romania again had little desire to join the war, including relinquishing large portions of territory. Until under threat of invasion by the USSR, Romania joined the Allied cause. After the war, the Socialist Republic of Romania was established, with the Communist Party forcing the king to abdicate the throne and abolish the monarchy. For 24 years, Nicolae Ceausescu governed the state, maintaining close ties with the Soviet Union, until the Romanian Revolution of 1989, which led to his capture and execution. In 1991, a new constitution was drafted, with a free market economy, establishing the modern state of Romania. In 2004, Romania joined the European Union. In recent times, there has been a movement for reunification with...
Okay, so basically now we get to the modern state of Romania. We're going to begin in regards to communism and orthodoxy with Father Paul's words. He gives a great little overview of the state of orthodoxy in Romania at the time.
What happened under communism in Romania?
Under communism in Romania, the government sought to suppress the faith in every way possible. Christian education was not allowed. And if the government saw somebody who was part of the faith who was influential in any strong way, they would find any and every way to imprison them and get them out of the public view. There was a movement in the 20th century called the Legionnaires' movement, which began basically as a religious movement, but became political. And it ended up in violence, and a lot of the Romanian priests and monks and elders who were a part of it renounced it at that time. But because they had any association with it whatsoever, the communist government would take that association, even if they had just come to a meeting and given one talk. They would take that as a sign that this was an anti-government and therefore anti-nationalist figure. They were somehow against Romania, and they would use that to imprison them. And the terms of imprisonment could be forced labor for a few months, but often it was for many, many years, to the point that many great figures died in those prison camps. To this day, they're still uncovering maps
And particularly they would take sort of, because I have when we get into my document, you'll see I have a section on the atrocities in Romania, and they would take the intellectuals. So if you were conservative, if you were Orthodox, if you were high-ranking clergy, say bishops, they had special prisons for them, or they would send them to labor camps where they would essentially die from starvation and be forced to work to death. And so it's often any type of intellectual that was in opposition to the communist regime would be sent to these labor camps.
Mass graves. And the really incredible thing is that in these mass graves, they find bones. They don't know who the bones belong to, but these bones are.
Yes, Mela is totally right. And I'm going to show you guys some of this. So in Pitești, they did human centipede type stuff. That's how bad it was. So this is where the psychological operation that I talked about, it's considered basically the most intense re-education experiment in history. And I'll show you just a photo. So the artist actually did, these are like artistic depictions of what happened. And you can see right here, this is them forcing these prisoners to be butt naked and basically do like the human centipede. Essentially, they'd kill you if you didn't do it. And so absolutely disgusting stuff. There's instances that if you had to sleep, for example, some of the clergy that survived the prison talked about how they would force people to sleep in a certain position. So you had to sleep perfectly on your back, and your neck or anything could not fall to one side or another. And if they saw you're sleeping too deeply, they would beat you for fear that you may be praying or doing any type of, having any sort of religious sentiments, or they would just wake you up and make you stay awake for days on end. So this is the type of stuff we're talking about at these, and this was novel at the time. The goal was to see like how far you could go to break somebody's psyche, to re-educate them to be a communist supporter. And one of the things that occurred is some of the prisoners actually turned on the other prisoners. And so it's kind of like it's almost like a distortion of the Stanford prison experiment, where they took prisoners and then they would allow them to orchestrate the torture of other prisoners. So they wouldn't be tortured, but they had to orchestrate or perform the torture on other prisoners. And there are instances of Orthodox priests and clergy eventually falling victim to the tortures, and you can't blame them for the stuff that they had to go through, and that they end up even persecuting their fellow prisoners. So, and there's multiple examples of faithful Orthodox men that never ever capitulated, and some of them died. Others actually eventually made it out. So, glory to God for that. Tennis Racket throws in €2, says, could you please make a video on Chechnya? They are with ISIS. Yeah, that's potentially, somebody might want to sponsor that in the future. So thank you very much, Tennis Racket, for the support. And Austin DeTulio throws in 20, says, going to bridegroom matins. I'll be listening on the drive. God bless y'all. Well, thank you so much, Austin. Really appreciate that, my man. And so anyways, this is what Mello was referring to regards to the Pitești experiment and prison experiment and everything. We're going to talk a little bit more about it, but it was horrific. He's going to discuss it here in just a few. Father Paul is.
Are often of an amber hue and fragrant, sometimes with myrrh streaming off of them. I've been able to venerate some of these relics, and I will tell you the fragrance coming off of them is unbelievable. And they're finding that many people were sanctified in these prisons, but the government did everything they could to suppress and crush orthodoxy.
I know we talked about this last time before, just very briefly, but could you talk a little bit about the Pitești experiment that happened in Romania?
Yeah. There's a book entitled The Anti-Humans. I don't remember the name of the author at the moment, but he talks a lot about this Pitești experiment. And the Pitești experiment went on for a little bit less than a year. It was discovered what they were doing.
Major thank you goes out to Logan again, gifted 10 more COTEL Crew memberships. Thank you so much, Logan. God bless you, brother. Really, really appreciate it.
And they had to shut down the program, although many of the methods used there, maybe not to the same extent, were still used at other prisons.
Come on, guys. Let's keep the nub wave up and gift some more memberships. This is fantastic.
Especially Ayud. was one of the big ones. There are a few other big prisons where they tried these, but in Pitești, they did I think it was about a 10-month experiment, and the goal was to see if they could dehumanize the prisoners through various types of torments. The torments were not just physical; they were also psychological. They would take common church hymns and change the words to make the words mock Christ and the Theotokos and faith, and make them sing them over and over again. They would make them perform mock liturgies where instead of communion, they would have human feces. They would place.
And that happened on multiple occurrences. So they would have these mock liturgies in actual fecal matter. They would force the prisoners to consume as a mock Eucharist. You see it. I mean, this, and we're going to look at some of the, I have a couple quotes from saints that survived, and they talk about how this was pure Satanism in the name of atheist communism.
Sadistic experiments with people. And if anyone ever tried to commit suicide, they would do everything they could to save their life. And then they would sit them in a chair, and they would torture their fellow prisoners even more harshly with them watching in order to keep people from ever trying to commit suicide. The idea was, can we dehumanize people to such an extent that they become quite literally like wild animals? And then can we build up those wild animals and reorganize them internally to become perfect communists? Instead of creating perfect communists, they created saints. They created many, many saints. This experiment was so horrific that few prisoners would ever talk about what they went through. They were so sadistic that the prisoners couldn't even sleep on their sides. They had to sleep perfectly on their back. And if it looked like they were at peace, it was assumed that they were praying, and the guards would come over and beat them even more severely. It was probably the most horrific, disgusting thing that has ever happened in a prison system in the history of mankind, my guess. I've never come across anything that was this horrific.
Well, and this is the general academic consensus too. Maybe not out of all mankind, but at least I've seen multiple scholars would say this was the worst form of psychological and physiological torture under basically communist history. Now we know the Holodomor and the mass killing of Orthodox Christians under very communist parties. But in regards to not killing them, but with the goal of re-educating and torturing them, this was by far the worst case in Romania.
Who are some of the
worst case in history occurred in Romania?
Figures that came out of, this prison experiment?
One of the names that I would recommend people look up is Father George Calciu. Father George Calciu, there's a really incredible and wonderful book about him from St. Herman of Alaska Press. It's called Father George Calciu, Calciu is the last name. Father George Calciu, I think that it's talks, interviews, and homilies or something like that. I don't remember the exact. But Father George Calciu was one figure who was in those experiments who ended up trying to commit suicide himself. He actually was about to jump over a railing when one of his fellow prisoners grabbed him from behind and held on to him. Father George eventually, when released, he was also exiled from the country. The Reagan administration had heard about him and his imprisonment, and they actually were able to negotiate his release. But he was exiled, so he came to the United States, where he served his last years. He was recently, after he reposed, I think 2006 or 8, I don't remember exactly when. I could be very wrong about that, but I think it was around that time. They in Romania, they exhumed his relics, and he's been found to be incorrupt.
I've heard you talk about Elder Cleopa as well. Was he part of that same prison experiment, or was he just under, communist torture?
Yeah. So Elder Cleopa, who God willing in 2025 will be officially Saint Cleopa. Elder Cleopa was able to escape direct imprisonment. He would flee into the wilderness, where he had his own torturous existence in the dangerous wilderness with the weather and the wild animals. And that's primarily where he was sanctified. And so when the Securitate, which is the Romanian secret police, when they would seek Elder Cleopa, he would flee into the wilderness. And he did that a couple times and spent quite an extended stay there. he became one of the most important evangelical figures of Romania, so that when communism finally fell, he was recognized out of all the great elders, and there are many great elders in Romania. He was probably recognized as being the greatest. He was an absolute master of the Jesus prayer. He was utterly clairvoyant. He would spend much of his day sitting outside of his cell. I've been there a couple of times, and there are benches all outside of his cell where the faithful would come and sit, and he would simply preach to them and teach. And he wrote many, many works. Not very many of them are translated, but there are a few. A good place to start is the book, The Truth of Our Faith. And many of his works are really just simple and educational, meant to re-educate the Romanians in the faith that is really their true heritage that had been squashed out by the Romanian government at the time, the communist government. I think it's probably wrong to call them the Romanian government. They were the communist government at heart. They were not Romanian at all, because Romanians are Orthodox at heart.
Watch the video you put out. I don't remember his name, but it started with a D. Father
Daniel.
Daniel. What's his story? What's his background?
Father Daniel was part of, along with the Legionnaires movement, there was another movement that was purely spiritual, called the Burning Bush movement. Then the Burning Bush movement was begun by a man who had the pen name of Sandu Tudor, that later became Father Daniel de la Raru. Father Daniel began his career as an intellectual. He was mainly a philosophical and political student who wrote on topics of culture, politics, philosophy. Eventually, he decided that he wanted to write an expose on the orthodoxy of Mount Athos, because he had heard that a lot of the life of Mount Athos was really not as it's presented to be. It was somewhat fraudulent in some way. And so he decided to go and check it out himself. And he had planned on staying for just a few days and learning a bit about it, coming back and writing this expose. He went there and befriended a monk who said, that's really not enough time, you just stay longer. And he ended up staying for quite a bit longer. I forget how many weeks or months he stayed, but he ended up integrating what he was learning into his own life. And he found that rather than being a fraud, it was the most legitimate life he'd ever seen. And he came back and became very, very disinterested with politics at that time and the philosophical movements. And so he decided that he wanted to dedicate himself to the practice of the Jesus prayer. And he began reading the Fathers of the Philokalia, which is this 5-volume anthology of spiritual writings, much of which has to do with the practice of the Jesus prayer. And he got a small group together, along with a monk from the Soviet Union who had escaped the Soviet Union and come and befriended him, and was a real master of the Jesus prayer from the writings of these elders. And they had this small group of Romanian, mainly intellectuals, who would gather at, if I remember right, Antim Monastery. And they would have meetings where they would discuss the writings of the Fathers of the Jesus prayer and practice it. And in doing so, many of them became masters themselves of the Jesus prayer. This Burning Bush movement, although it was largely informal, was also squashed by the communists, who then went, of course, imprisoned all the people who were a part of it. But the Burning Bush movement didn't end there. This is the true miracle. It just continued on in the prisons. And because of the Burning Bush movement, those who had deepened their prayer life were able to take it into the prisons, and thus many of the prisons became like monasteries. And even within the midst of all this torment, true prayer, true faith absolutely spread. And it came to the point where there were not hundreds, but literally thousands of monks, priests, and laymen who were deeply practicing prayer. If I remember the story right, I did a recent series on various Romanian elders, and so I might be getting some of them mixed up. But when I believe when Father Daniel, he was released, or he may have been one of the ones to repose in the prison system. But either way, the news of his repose immediately spread everywhere. Everybody was aware of it. In some of these monasteries, or in some of these prisons, the prisoners learned Morse code, and they would communicate through the walls through Morse code, and they would let them know whenever one of these great figures had reposed or was released. So they kind of kept up to date with one another with that type of communication. They would also they would also sometimes hear the radios of the communist guards and hear reports about, what's happening in the free world in America, and maybe that would kind of fill them with hope. But ultimately, they continued to live like monastics, so that when many of them were released, they then went and formed these monastic communities and just continued the work. And Sandu Tudor, Father Daniele, became one of the great founding members of this Burning Bush movement, and his legacy absolutely transformed Romania through communism.
So Jesse asks, who sponsored this stream? Our friend Claudiu from Romania actually sponsored today's stream, who wanted me to discuss a part of what he believes, and it is a fact, an important piece of Romanian history that is often overlooked and a lot of Orthodox Christians in the West just aren't aware of. So shout out to Claudiu for sponsoring today's stream. Jay Hamza throws in 20, says, this is something happening right now in Ukraine under Voldemort. Yes, absolutely. The Khazar in chief in Ukraine. Pray for those suffering in Ukraine and clergy and the priests. Amen to that. They are being sent to prison and such. Absolutely. Absolutely, they are. And then the dance Commodore throws in 50 and says, even now these events aren't discussed in the mainstream in Romania. That blows me away. Based on just me diving into this for a couple days, it amazes me how this isn't like a central piece of Romanian identity. But it makes sense why it wouldn't be part of mainstream Romania, because you look, as I said, you look at what's happening to Georgescu and the annulment of his candidacy, him winning the election. You see the intervention of the EU. You see the EU pushing all these Eastern Orthodox countries like Romania, Serbia, Greece to accept homosexuality, sexual sin. Serbia being one in particular that has been very resistant to that. And we've seen the Western media demonize them for such activity. And hopefully Romania, I don't know the social, maybe somebody or the Dance Commodore could speak to this, what the sort of social mores of Romania are. I hope that it's much more resistant to some of the Western infiltration of our subversive LGBTQ and globalist ideology. But I would say we see a parallel here. And so by the end of the stream, looking at what the communists did to take over Romania, I think is enlightening to see how the EU and Western powers are infiltrating these Eastern European bloc countries and essentially try to take control over it for themselves, while populism and right-wing nationalism is absolutely on the rise across the entire planet. And so the globalists are finding themselves sort of out of control and unable to control the narrative and unable to control these populations to support their agenda. And therefore, they're infiltrating and subverting the same way that the communists did. He said many learned about them in the 2000s from books. In recent years, they started soft censoring the books, accusing them of fascism. I noticed that, actually. I noticed that when I was just doing I was curious like what the general sentiments of this book were. And I was looking at the characterization of Georgescu, and it always goes back to fascism. It always goes back to fascism. These people are right-wing fascists, and therefore it's an existential threat. And this is what the official claim is by the EU right now, is that Georgescu is being promoted by the Russians for being a right-wing, what they call a ultra-nationalist, far right-wing potential fascist candidate, even though it's just basically Orthodox Christianity and nationalism and national sovereignty that he's promoting. Again, check out his interview with Tucker Carlson. It was a recent one online. And shout out to our sister, Rachel Wilson. She's in the chat. She says, the Romanian monastery near my house has relics of some of the martyrs from the communist prisons. Some of the Romanians who attend had family members in the prisons. Well, that's amazing. I didn't realize that the monastery near you guys, I've heard you mention it before when chatting with you. I didn't realize it was Romanian, but that's amazing. That's incredible. And God bless you and the Wilsons during our Holy Week. Blessed Pascha to you guys. And Rachel, I hope you're feeling better. I've been praying for you and the family. I hope that your health has taken an upturn. God bless you, sister. Appreciate appreciate your friendship and everything you and Andrew do. Okay, let's finish our video here with Father Paul, and then we'll start getting into some more details and overview of this whole thing.
Through the period of communism.
What can people take away from what communism is? Because it seems like nowadays people, they want communism because they think it's going to answer all their problems. All of society's problems will be answered by communism, supposedly. So what could people take away from what happened in Romania?
Much of what we've discussed today actually could be related to this same question of when we see people who are advocating for communism. I think one of the first things we do, especially as Orthodox Christians, is to look with utter amazement and just to be utterly baffled, knowing what we know about communism and what it produced. How could anybody really aspire to these things? And I think the answer is that when you look at the ideals that communism claims to pursue, we recognize that those are indeed part of the yearning of the heart of man. And we can recognize that and say, okay, there's actually something beautiful that this is aiming for. The problem is that communism does so in an ideological form. And I know I've talked about this before, but I define ideology as when you take a worldview and you make it more important than the person sitting next to you. And this is why communism believes that people are expendable. If they stand in the way of the revolution, they're to be wiped out. And we should just accept that. I think what we really need to recognize about this is that the heart will never find its fulfillment in communism. It'll never find its fulfillment in any ideology. And even if communism were to actually accomplish what it sets out to accomplish, which it does not, we'd have to ask, what then? What then is man really going to live for? If we have a belief, a philosophy, an ideology that does not destroy death, people are going to come up with other motivations for life, and eventually they're going to come into conflict. We will never find the solution to mankind's problems in any ideology, and especially not, we've proven, in communism. It has been absolutely sufficiently proved in the 20th century. So then what we have to do is look at these ideals and say, can we find them in a proper way? And oddly enough, if you're to take some of the ideals of communism, not all of them, but some of the ideals of communism, and input Christ into them, put Christ right at the center, what you find is Orthodox monasticism. You find a monastic system, and you find people who are utterly at peace with utter joy, no matter what happens around them. No matter what persecution comes their way, they're completely at peace. So once we remove Christ, this is really the lesson. You can take even good ideals and they become utterly destructive. They become utterly destructive, not just to society. This is really important. Not just to society, but to the individual hearts of those who adhere to them. And this is where we see people who believe that they're preaching love and yet seem to be the most bitter, angry, broken people you'll ever meet. And they can't seem to make the connection between the fact that what they're preaching and what they have inside of them don't seem to mesh. When they realize that, they seem to want to blame the world around them. But if the only way for you to find peace is for the world around you to live the way that you want, you might as well give up now. Your method of life is futile. It'll never happen.
So that was some great words by Father Paul regarding a general overview of the Romanian Orthodox persecution under communism. So guys, smash that like. We're going to be diving a little bit more into everything here. I wanted to just share a few things with you guys. And first thing, we still are in Holy Week and we still are fasting. And if you guys are interested in a nutrition book by Seraphim of Father Moses's parish, he is an IFBB pro bodybuilder. He has put together an ebook on the Orthodox fasting cookbook for strength and performance. If that is something that you guys would like access to and to purchase, please use the link right here. So I got a affiliate link. Use this link right here and grab yourself the ebook on Orthodox fasting. It basically shows you how to get high protein meals during the fasting period so that you can at least maintain your gains. Sometimes a little difficult to make any actual gains during the fasting period, but Father Moses has been on the channel and we talked about this, and it's really a time to maintain your gains, focus on your spiritual life. And then once you get off the fast, especially if you're in the Antiochian church like I am, you have 40 days of no fasting. It's 40 days of feasting. So I'm very excited about 40 days of feasting after Pascha. But if you guys would like access to that, please use that link that I just posted. And if anybody would like access to our membership, so the show notes today will be for $5 a month. All the show notes are available. Also, we'll be meeting for our premium members meeting. That's $25 a month. That's a premium think tank. If you would be interested in that, please sign up right here. Would greatly appreciate it. Also, if anybody would like to sign up for a one-on-one session, you can do so with this link right here. And we can get into a private Zoom meeting and cover any topic that your heart desires. And then if you would like to sponsor a stream, again, a major shout out today to Claudio, our Romanian Orthodox brother, who has requested this stream to kind of cover the persecution of the church under communism. If you have a great topic that you would like to sponsor, please sign up with this link right here. And I will email you to get a little details on what the topic your heart desires. And then we will, or I will come up with a way to do the research and present that information. So check that out if that's something you would be interested in. And then the last and final thing is if you're in the market for some Orthodox items, be it prayer ropes, incense lamps, icons, whatever it may be, check out orthodoxdepot.com. orthodoxdepot.com. Use promo code COTEL, COTEL. You'll get 10% off. You can help me out as well as a great Orthodox company here in the U.S. So check that out if that's something you would be interested in. All right. Next thing that I wanted to get into, like I said, we're going to watch the entire documentary titled Beyond Torture. So I have tons of videos here. Like I said, this is one talking about how Romania in the revolution defeated communism. This one is of a guy talking about the burning bush movement and orthodoxy under communist Romania. But one of particular interest that Claudio requested is this video right here, Beyond Torture. And we have these as well. So this is Father Arseni talking about suffering in communist prisons. We have this one of Kalichu, Father George, the miracle in prison on Easter's night. I thought that would be appropriate since we're coming up to Pascha this week, this Saturday. What was this one? Oh, this is looking at some of the icons that have emerged due to the persecution. So these are icons in Romania. I'm going to share that link with you guys. I doubt we're going to watch that. We're not going to have time. So if you want to check it out, I'm going to share all these links with you. Some of these were specifically requested by Claudio. So there's the link to that one. And then here's one, Incredible Stories, Tortured for Christ in Romanian Communist Prisons by Father Valerian. Again, this is all in Romanian, so I'd have to read some of the subtitles, which I'm happy to do if you guys are interested. Here's another one, The Miracle of the Virgin Mary, New Romanian Orthodox Saints, Venerable Sophian and Antim. Probably going to skip that one, but I'll share that link with you guys if you want to check it out. Here's that link as well. And then the last one that Claudio sent me was, I was kept isolated for 3 months for Christ. And this is a short video. It's only 2:57. So I thought we could share this one later. And this is a Romanian priest talking about his experiences. So before we get into Beyond Torture, and it kind of brings this up, but Claudio wanted me to sort of recognize. So look, this is all in Romanian. Let me refresh it so I can put it in English. Okay, there we go in English. So these are some of the torture, re-education of detainees from communist prison, the Pitești experiment. And so you could see the human centipede, people being bound, people being whipped by other prisoners. You see the sort of weird psychological experiment to get the torture or the prisoners to torture other prisoners. Waterboarding, again, they're all naked, being beat. So that is a little bit of some of the artistic artwork. I'm going to share that with you guys if you would like access to that. But now we're going to dive into Beyond Torture. This is a 34-minute documentary on the Gulag of Pitești. in Romania. And this was a 2007 documentary that was put together. And this was requested by Claudio. So let's check this out. Again, most of it is in English. It's an English documentary, but whenever the Romanian clergy speak, I will read what's on the screen so that people listening on the podcast can know what's being said. And actually, before we even dive into this, I think just covering a little bit of the document that I put together would be beneficial. So it gives you a full overview of what it is that we're dealing with here. So I'm not going to go over this whole thing. This basically, like I said, this is the longest show note document that I've ever put together. It's 23 pages. I am not going to read all this to you, but if you like access to this, it basically gives you the details. And I've pulled from multiple different sources that I could find online. But background: following World War II, Romania found itself increasingly within the sphere of Soviet influence. In 1944, Soviet troops occupied Romania, setting the stage for a communist takeover. Although King Michael I tried to resist, by December 1947, he was forced to abdicate at gunpoint. So they surrounded the king's palace, and then they went in, and the communists at gunpoint said, basically, we're in charge now, and abolished the monarchy the next morning. So, and he went and lived in exile until the fall of communism in Romania. Formation of Communist Romania in 1948, the Romania's People's Republic, communism, was established under a Stalinist political system. The Romanian Communist Party, initially weak and unpopular, seized control primarily through Soviet support, political purges, rigged elections, and widespread terror. I saw one that they were covering the election that they had, and it claimed that the Communist Party won like 347 seats. The Peasant Party won like 37, and then the Liberal Party won like 3. And historians have gone back and looked at it, and they now suspect that the communists won less than 50% of the votes, but because they rigged the election and they had false ballots, and basically the same thing that we experience here in the United States, especially in 2020, the communists did. And that's how they officially took power and filled the parliament with their own people, is through these rigged elections. And so under Georgiu Dej, Romania pursued rapid industrialization, collectivization of agriculture, and extensive ideological indoctrination. The regime became notorious for forced collectivization and violent suppression of peasant revolts, extensive use of the secret police, the Securitate, known for severe human rights abuses, and harsh labor camps, gulags, for prisons where political prisoners, religious leaders, and intellectuals faced brutal conditions. And we talked a little bit about Nicolae Ceausescu's era. And so he developed the development of an extreme personality cult. We mentioned this, intensified repression and economic hardship, widespread poverty, and despite on paper having a strong economy, industrialized economy, extensive surveillance through the Securitate network with informers permeating every aspect of society. Again, it's a Marxist-Leninist regime. So, religion, the opium of the people. Overview of the persecution. So the Romanian Orthodox Church, deeply integrated into Romanian national identity, experienced severe persecutions. Everything that we talked about: closed churches, destroyed churches, clergy and laity who resisted ideological conformity faced imprisonment, torture, and execution. And then religious education was banned or heavily restricted, replaced by mandatory atheistic indoctrination in schools. And so the methods: legal bureaucratic control, propaganda, indoctrination, surveillance, and infiltration. And then a few of the gulag systems: we have the Pitești prison, the Aiud prison, and the Gurla prison. These were, again, famous instances within major atrocities. Now, this is one that took me a little time to put together, but the Pitești experiment, which we're going to learn all about here in just a second, victims were primarily students, Orthodox seminarians, intellectuals, priests, or anti-communist dissidents. It is known as one of the most horrific experiments in communist-era Europe. Systematic, methodical torture aimed at psychological and spiritual destruction of the prisoners. Prisoners were tortured into becoming torturers themselves, forced into brutal acts of violence, sexual degradation, and blasphemy, targeted Orthodox Christians specifically, forcing prisoners to publicly renounce their faith, desecrate religious symbols, and mock religious rituals. And then the Aiud prison, clergy, political dissidents, intellectuals, and anti-communist figures. It was notorious for its brutal conditions, high death rates, targeted persecution of Orthodox clergy. Prisoners faced chronic starvation, freezing temperatures, systematic beatings, prolonged solitary confinement, forced labor, and psychological torture. Known for intense ideological re-education, violent indoctrination, and humiliation designed to break inmates spiritually and psychologically. And the Sighet prison, known as the prison for the Romanian elite, communist authorities imprisoned Romania's pre-communist leadership, including former ministers, bishops, generals, professors, and intellectuals. And it was also, again, characterized by horrific conditions. The Danube Black Sea Canal, over 100,000 political prisoners and forced laborers. Massive forced labor project labeled the graveyard of Romanian intellectuals. Prisoners forced into exhausting manual labor, subjected to starvation, disease, brutal beatings, and executions for disobedience and insufficient productivity. High mortality rates due to dangerous working conditions, malnutrition, and systematic abuse. And so, again, if you guys want to read this whole document, it'll be available at the website for you guys. So feel free to check that out if you prefer. And so Massacre of the Romanian Revolution, we've already kind of mentioned some of this stuff, so I'm going to skip through. Here's the Pitești prison experiment. This is what I wanted to give you guys an overview of before we actually watch the documentary, so you can already know what to expect. So it took place essentially 120 kilometers northwest of Bucharest. It was conceived by Romanian communist authorities as part of an intensive program for ideological re-education aimed at violently transforming young prisoners, specifically students and clergy, who were seen as a threat to their religious faith. The primary goal was the complete destruction of the prisoner's identity, morality, faith, and loyalty to any institution besides the communist regime. Orthodox Christianity, deeply rooted in Romanian identity, was viewed as a major ideological adversary. And the architect of the sadistic experiment was Alexandru Nicolshi, a notorious high-ranking officer in the Securitate who authorized Turcanu, a prisoner turned collaborator, to orchestrate and carry out the tortures. And so methods of the experiment, the initiation phase, they would first humiliate and get the prisoners to a level of betrayal. Upon arrival at Pitești, prisoners underwent immediate psychological and physical violence. Torturers intentionally used severe beatings to shock prisoners, breaking their resistance quickly. The phase included forced confessions. Prisoners had to repeatedly and publicly confess their crimes against communism and denounce friends, family members, clergy, and even fictional accomplices. And then total isolation. Prisoners were completely isolated from family and friends, with no communication allowed. The psychological isolation was intensified by constant fear and paranoia. And then the physical tortures and humiliation. Severe beatings. Prisoners endured continuous beatings with clubs, sticks, whips, metal bars, resulting in broken bones, internal injuries, and permanent disability. The position of Christ. Prisoners were bound in cuneiform positions and tortured as a direct mockery of Christ's crucifixion. Forced ingestion of human waste and urine. Victims were forced to consume feces and urine to break their spirits, morality, and self-respect, often in the form of fake Orthodox liturgies that were totally inverted. Sexual torture. Prisoners forced horrific sexual humiliation and violence intended to degrade them completely and to violate Orthodox moral purity. Sleep and food deprivation. Chronic starvation combined with sleep deprivation was systematically employed to weaken prisoners physically and mentally. And then third, the psychological torture and indoctrination. So blasphemous liturgies and rituals. Prisoners were forced to participate in grotesque mockeries of Orthodox Christian liturgies, including obscene and blasphemous acts designed specifically to desecrate and ridicule Christianity. Forced apostasy. Orthodox prisoners, particularly priests, monks, and devout laity, were compelled to publicly deny Christ, denounce their faith, desecrate icons, and repudiate sacred objects. Those who refused suffered intensified tortures or were forced to watch other prisoners suffer terribly until they yielded. And then mock confessions and betrayal of clergy. Prisoners were compelled to invent false confessions implicating respected clergy members in fabricated crimes such as espionage, moral depravity, and anti-communist activities. And then I have a section here on notable Roman Orthodox Christian Church and Romanian saints said about communism. So Father George Kalichu, a prominent survivor of the Pitești prison experiment, who later became an influential spiritual leader, his views, he described communism as explicitly satanic, a regime founded upon a hatred of God and human dignity. According to Father Kalichu, communism was inherently atheistic and sought not merely political control, but complete spiritual subjugation and moral annihilation of Orthodox believers. And he has a quotation I found: communism was not merely political tyranny, it was an outright war against Christ and his church. Father Arseni, who we have in one of the videos, renowned elder and spiritual father, imprisoned repeatedly under communism. He taught that communism was permitted by God to purify and strengthen the faith of Orthodox believers. He consistently framed the communist period as a test of faith, fidelity, and endurance, emphasizing spiritual fortitude amidst persecution. And a quote that I found: under communism, our churches became battlegrounds for spiritual warfare. Martyrdom became a path toward Christ. And Father Justin Parvu, a highly revered Romanian elder who spent years in prison by communists, his views: Father Justin viewed communism as an attempt to entirely annihilate Christianity from Romania, and warned continuously that the fall of communism about lingering atheistic and materialistic influences. His quote: the communist prisons were Romania's modern catacombs, places of martyrdom, suffering, and true orthodoxy. And then Valeru Gefcu, saint of Romanian prisons, he expressed explicitly that communism represented spiritual darkness opposed to Christ, describing prison as the university of spiritual enlightenment where the faith was purified. And his quote: communism seeks to steal our souls, but Christ uses suffering to give us eternal life. And so how the communist regime in Romania explicitly attempted to undermine Orthodox Christian morality was it promoted a militant atheism. So it officially promoted atheism in education and media, prohibiting any sort of religious instruction in school, and forcing clergy and faithful into apostasy through torture, attacking Orthodox family and sexual morality. So a major thing that occurred, what really occurred under all Soviet Union states, was abortion. So they encouraged abortion and birth control as instruments of social policy, undermining Orthodox teaching on the sanctity of life, and promoting divorce laws that eroded traditional family structures. Something that, wait, so you're telling me that this is what the communist regime did immediately upon taking power? It sounds very similar to modern day America. Destruction of clerical authority, public humiliation, imprisonment, torture, and execution of faithful clergy to remove their moral and spiritual influence. Thank God we're not there yet. Installing compromised clerics, Operation Gladio, who cooperated with communist authorities to weaken moral authority from within, and then forced blasphemies and apostasy. The Pitești experiment explicitly forced prisoners to blaspheme Christ, renounce their faith, engage in grotesque immoral acts to systematically break their Orthodox moral foundation. And then more on specifically communist subversion of orthodoxy. But one of the interesting things that I was finding is that so many of the Romanian anti-communists had strong views on Jews. So I was curious, like, what was the Jewish composition of the early communist leadership in Romania? And this is what I found, that during the early years, several prominent leaders within Romanian Communist Party had Jewish origins, notably Anna Poker, foreign minister, one of the highest ranking female communists globally; Vasil Luca, originally a Hungarian Jewish descent, minister of finance; and Isyov Kishnievsky, a prominent ideologist. So interesting. Eventually, though, so the Soviet Union had an explicitly anti-Semitic policy. If you guys didn't know, the official communist stance was explicitly opposed to anti-Semitism, aligned with broader Marxist-Leninist ideological principles that rejected ethnic hatred and racism, and that this eventually was the official policy also within Romania. So they officially recognized the Holocaust atrocities. Communist authorities prosecuted and imprisoned those involved in any anti-Semitic activities. And then communists officially condemned anti-Semitism as reactionary and fascist. So if you were deemed to be anti-Semitic, you were equated with fascism. And then here's a detailed timeline. We're not going to get into that. We're going to try to jump into the documentary here. But this is just connecting some of the current happenings in the political climate in modern day Romania. So the political scene is characterized by a mix of traditional parties and emerging nationalist movements. As we said, they've already annulled the 2020 presidential election. So in November 2024, Calin Georgescu, a right-wing nationalist and Orthodox Christian candidate, unexpectedly won the first round of Romania's presidential elections. However, the Constitutional Court annulled the results in December, citing allegations of Russian interference, including cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns aimed at supporting his candidacy. And then in March 2025, as I read earlier, he has been banned from running for president, and he was arrested and put in jail for a few days previous to that. And so orthodoxy and communism, this is the last thing that I put together, was the great, I was looking at and trying to find resources on the greatest persecutions of Orthodox Christians under communism. And the most extensive and systematic was obviously the Soviet Union and Russia. So the Bolshevik Revolution, the Stalinist era, the Great Terror, the Khrushchev's renewed persecution. So we're talking about millions, contemporary academics theorize about 30 million. Some on the extreme end theorize maybe close to 50 million. But millions of Orthodox Christians died under Soviet Russia. But Romania, what I found, was the most brutal psychological persecution. So out of all of them, it was Romania that was the most psychologically abusive. And so the Pitești experiment, everything that we just covered there. And then Albania, probably the most total religious ban and isolation. Bulgaria, systematic persecution and infiltration, which was generally true of all the communist states that had Orthodox clergy. And then Yugoslavia, complex persecution in Serbia, Montenegro, and Macedonia. And then Czechoslovakia and some other instances. But that was the last part that I just kind of put together. But some notable Orthodox martyrs and saints under communist persecution: Patriarch Tikhon of Moscow, St. Luke of Crimea, St. John Maximovich of, depending on, choose your city, Shanghai, San Francisco. And then Father George Calciu, Metropolitan Vissarion, and others in Albania, and then numerous new martyrs canonized in Russia or across the board: Romania, Serbia, Bulgaria, Albania. So all types of places. So that kind of goes over my document. I mean, there's a lot more information in there, as you guys can see. It's 23 pages, but I don't want to bore you guys with an overview of my document. So if you want to read that whole thing, it will be available on the website for anybody who's interested. It's just $5 a month membership. So all this, and it has a detailed timeline of events and names and places and dates. So if that's something you'd be interested, check that out. Josiah Elleron throws in $20. Thank you so much, Josiah. He says, David, will it be confusing that after I am chrismated, I feel very called to be a priest? Father Josiah, will I be? I mean, talk about having the name of a great voice. Well, yeah, absolutely. If that's what you feel your calling is, well, glory to God, Josiah. I think that's a fabulous calling. So God bless you, brother. And I would recommend, if you're just now getting chrismated, give it a few years before you decide to be clergy. Because once you join, we always say, welcome to the arena. The spiritual warfare ramps up. The demonic attacks ramp up. You are now an explicit enemy of the devil. So just, kind of get in the groove and be part of the church for a couple years. And God willing, if your calling is to be a priest, do it. We need more priests. We absolutely need more priests. But I think most priests would probably advise to be Orthodox for a few years before making that jump. But that's excellent, man. Congratulations on being brought into the church. Glory to God. Welcome home. And Josiah throws another 5. No comment. Thank you so much, Josiah. Kobo throws in 25, says King Michael was forced to abdicate under the executing a bunch of student hostages. Yes. And under gunpoint. Yeah. So it was a total, forced takeover by the communists. But thank you so much, Cabo. And Josiah throws in 10 more, says, so my phone was wonky. Mostly I was saying that I am greatly convicted to be a priest after I am chrismated in our amazing church, I'll be another Father Josiah, albeit not as wise as he is. Well, I think that's great, brother. And if you've already talking with your priest and this is something that he's pushing you towards, do it, man. We need more priests. We need more young priests. And anybody, if you feel called, if you've been Orthodox and you feel called to be a priest, do it. We need you guys. We need more Orthodox priests. So that's great, Josiah. God bless you, brother. Really appreciate that. And let me see if anybody sent in any other questions or comments. All right, let's get into our documentary here on Beyond Torture. This was the documentary that Claudio requested that we take a look at. This is, again, we'll be going over the Gulag of Pitești here. So let's check this out.
Paintings. I want to create.
And you've probably seen, I haven't, my Streamlabs doesn't work anymore, so I can't do some of the video intros I used to do. God willing, we'll get that fixed here, but I've talked with Streamlabs. There's some technical difficulty they can't solve. But this particular monastery here in Romania, you've probably seen that in some of my videos. So it's a gorgeous monastery that is entirely covered in iconography on the outside and inside. So you may have seen this in some of my intro videos.
Just beauty.
Is that audio good for you guys? It's kind of quiet. This is as loud as I can make it, so just FYI. Again, even though the Western globalist elite are not explicitly communist in their ideology, I mean, some of them are, but you see the same things, right? The denial of God, the destruction of family, and ideological conformity. I mean, we are experiencing the sort of lower tier of these aspects in our contemporary society right now. So again, I think that's why connecting our stream today with the contemporary moment, we can see that these forces are still active, maybe in a different way. And this is Father George Calciu right here that Father Paul was talking about. He's now reposed, but this is him who was afforded by the Reagan administration to be brought to the United States and was taken from Romania so that he could build some type of Orthodox resistance, talk about his experiences, and spread the faith. This is where I'm going to read for anybody watching in the podcast. So he says, we were transferred from one prison to another, and we were stopped somewhere outside the city, and from there we disembarked in big covered trucks. And we were taken to the prison. The surprise was this. When I got off the train, I saw the platform of the railway station of Pitești Station, and there were no civilians. Let me go back. I forgot to translate. No doubt that Pitești was the worst prison. I lived in terror for 6 months in the basement of cell 1. I stayed 1 year in the cell, but for 6 months I lived in terror because besides the beatings, there was something else. Oh, and the torturers are cellmates, actually. We were standing around us with clubs and would kick. Oh. Can you guys see me yet? Okay, I think we're back now, guys. You guys hear me? Everybody hearing me in the chat? Okay, so I did not suspect that the documentary was going to be copyrighted because it's not that many views, not super popular, but it looks like we're not going to be able to watch the documentary here. So I guess we can go into some of the other videos that I have that shouldn't be copyrighted. But let me share this link because this is actually a really great documentary over the whole thing. So I'm going to share the link with everybody. So you guys can watch the rest. We were at the 12:28 minute mark, so almost halfway. What the? So, oh my gosh, it was getting ready to copyright it again just for having the the picture up. Okay, so it looks like this documentary is heavily censored. So, let's get into, let's see, what can we check out? So I got this one right here. This is a really good one. It's not of the saints. Claudio specifically requested some of these. So let me do the Father Arseni one, suffering in communist prisons, and I'll speak over it. Okay. So I must say that this great pain or horror is difficult to explain because it is beyond logic. We had a regime of extermination, specifically by starvation. I was also isolated in refrigerating rooms. You cannot live more than two. What? What? Okay, guys. You hear me?